Okay, so unfortunately, we're pretty used to this in racing. Stop me if you've heard this before. But there was a scathing article in the New York Times questioning the existence or the necessity of the existence of horse racing. It's 4,600 words. That was the last time you've seen a 4,600 word guest essay. So I'm guessing it wasn't edited down very much. It's called Dead Athletes, Empty Stands, Billions to Keep Horse Racing Alive. Why are we subsidizing this sport is basically the gist of the article. It's by Noah Shackman, who used to be the editor-in-chief of Rolling Stone and the Daily Beast, and now he is a contributing editor at Wired. So I don't know what happened there. I'm not going to be one of these people who's going to reflexively say, like, how dare you come into our house and say all these negative things. Like, I don't think it was 100% a hit piece, but it was pretty damn close. He talks about a lot of different issues. He talks about high profile breakdowns like New York Thunder. Mm-hmm. He talks about, I think rightfully so, the deplorable conditions of the backstretch for some of the workers in our industry. And I'll get to that in a little bit. He talks a lot about the subsidies that racing gets a lot of times from other forms of casino gambling. And then he kind of just brushes over any of the positive that racing has to combat that. Like, I think the decreased fatality rate that HISA just reported last week is mentioned in one sentence. Even HISA itself does not really get much of a mention. Now, to me, that's a big part of the story. If you're going to have a 4,600 word article about the ills of horse racing, you might want to mention that there was a congressionally mandated oversight body instituted in the past 4 years in horse racing that has since helped to catch cheaters and decrease the fatality rate and make the sport safer undeniably for all of its participants under its jurisdiction. That was barely mentioned. So to me, it reeks of someone who came in with an agenda. And just full disclosure, I met Noah Shackman at Saratoga when he was following Terry Finley around. Terry had a couple of quotes in the article. And I just got to say one thing. Noah talked to me for a little bit, and he seemed like an okay enough guy. The thing that kind of put me off, that was off-putting to me, is he starts talking to me and he whips out his notepad and just starts writing. Now, I was never a fancy editor-in-chief at a big magazine, but one of the first things I learned in journalism school is that if you're talking to someone and you're going to start taking notes on what they're saying, you ask them, can I take notes? The same way you would not pull out a recorder and stick it in somebody's face without asking, can I record what you're saying? So I just thought that was a little funky. And I can't remember exactly when he pulled out the notepad, but I'm guessing it was when I said one of the things that wasn't quite flattering to the industry. So I have many thoughts about this. And I think several people have responded in a really, really strong, passionate way that I appreciate. Andrew Cohen from the Paulick Report, Ray Paulick from the Paulick Report, Light Up Racing, Bill Finley. We're not going to talk about it a ton because we talked about it with Natalie Voss. I suggest you go read some of those responses. But the thing I'll say is that this is not a charity. This is not, the governments and casinos are not giving us this money just to prop up an industry that doesn't have any business existing. We supply tax revenue. We employ tens of thousands of people across the country, farms, racetracks, veterinary clinics, all sorts of different facets, sales companies of the industry and the agriculture business that are supported by horses and the horse industry. It's just fun. It's fascinating to me in like a publication in particular. Why don't you go talk about Amazon? Why don't you go talk about Tesla and all of the subsidies and all the government contracts that are being handed out to these gigantic companies, as opposed to an industry that's as old as any in the sports business in racing, and has done a lot of good in the past several decades to prop itself up and to get better, especially on the safety side. I just thought it was low-hanging fruit. You know what I mean? Because the New York Times has been negative about racing for a long time, and doesn't have the power that it did. Doesn't have the clout that it once did in the mid-20th century. So it's just so easy because there aren't going to be a ton of advocates. There are not going to be too many powerful people who are leaning on you, telling you not to say this or that. I don't know, John. It just seemed like punching down to me. I know there are rich people in this business. There are some powerful people in this business, but overall, it's a business that's been kicked around a lot, especially by this publication. And to me, it was an unnecessary version of punching down.
Well, it was a hit piece, no doubt about it. Number one. Number two, Joe, it was a hit piece that once he found out that not all the quotes and not all the facts were going to back what he wanted to do, he incorporated other things. And he basically merged together our industry, the thoroughbred industry, with the standardbred industry and the quarter horse industry, and basically painted the picture that all equine industries are one, and that the one industry that dealing with horses exploits the horse, abuses the horse, and on top of it is stealing your money, Joe, taxpayer public, on top of it. So not only are they ruthless and brutal and terrible people, but they're also taking money out of orphans' pockets and out of welfare programs. And that's basically, I think, going into it, what he wanted to do, what he wanted to accomplish was to come up with a way to serve that purpose. Now, you'd say, why would he, basically ignore details and comments that would change the tenor of the article? Well, Joe, according to Wikipedia, in October of 22, Rolling Stone broke the news that the FBI had raided the home of an ABC producer, James Meek, but left out the detail that the raid was carried out because of child pornography. Instead, that, quote unquote, Meek appears to be on the wrong side of a national security apparatus, end quote, and that the raid had been instigated by the government because of Meek's reporting on national security. Who would do that? Who would do that, Joe? Well, it's no other than our friend Noah Shackman, who personally knows the accused Meek and is considered friendly with him, had personally intervened to remove the charges and rewrote the article to give it a different spin. So the guy, as a professional journalist, the guy has a history of changing the way that he's reporting on things to fit his narrative. And that is ingenuous and quite honestly, it is disheartening that, he needs to sell an article to the New York Times, and he has it in his head that he's going to hit on these points already before he even steps into the industry and starts talking to people or starts doing any kind of insight and reporting, investigative reporting himself. So I really think that those are a couple of things that were going into it as to why there was such a negative spin on this. And Joe, granted, we did not do ourselves as an industry any favors when it comes to horses breaking down, when it comes to where people live on the backstretch. He being Noah, the author, kind of loosely insinuated that the trainers are doping horses and are not paying their employees properly, and kind of sprinkled some details in there about Asmussen and some alleged trainers also that were coming in and allegedly doping, I should say, their horses. And he was very free and loose with a lot of those details, which I think, again, it served his narrative, even if it wasn't 100% factual. But overall, I was really disappointed with not only the way that the article came out, but also the fact that, again, it shone light on some things that we need to continue to improve. He did mention HISA. He did mention safety, when, just to kind of buttress some of his points, like good, bad, good, that type of thing, in a formula. And those things should be highlighted. The other thing that he did, Joe, was he also shone a light on the fact that we still need to have a better PR response to some of these articles and some of these hit pieces. I know Light Up Racing came out with some talking points, and they were certainly helpful, and I thought that they did it on a timely measure. But I'm still not sure that we as an industry shouldn't have a professional PR group to address some of these issues, almost like what we're trying to build with the lobbying group on the racing side. Quite frankly, it's really coming through. So, look, you can take an article like this and go one of two ways. You can ignore it, you can bury it, you can say, the guy was doing a hit piece and hope that it goes away in the next news cycle, which is 24 hours later. Or you can really look at it and say, you know what, there were a couple of points in here. It wasn't the headline points that he was trying to promote, but there are a couple points in here that we as an industry still need to continue to address and improve upon. So that way they can be removed from this negative talk about the industry. But overall, I think he kind of jerry-rigged and fit a square peg into a round narrative. And that's not really fair for any industry.
No, for sure. And I'm going to get into the points that he made that I think are legitimate and that need discussion, because I don't know, if you watched the show before, we're not cheerleaders for the industry. Like we are very critical when the industry deserves it. But I think in a lot of cases, especially in pieces like this, it's taking more of a beating than it deserves.
Right.
And I just think of the headline. Like the headline is so sensational.
Right.
And like, especially coming from the New York Times, like, how many headlines have they soft pedaled in the Trump era to make it seem like it's not a 5-alarm crisis what's happening? And like, especially like the Israel-Palestine conflict and all those, like they are just so deferential to power when it comes to their headlines in particular. For them to run this headline shows you, I think, what the editorial board really thinks and really wants to convey.
And I'm glad you said that the New York Times wrote the headline, because as you know, being a professional writer, like that's not necessarily one and the same. If you're writing an article, you don't necessarily have the ability to write the headline. So yeah, it was definitely the liberty that they took, on top of that article. I'm sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, no, it's just like they were like, Trump could like literally rip up the Constitution on camera, and the New York Times would be like, an unconventional approch to the Constitution.
He saved paper, right? Exactly.
Just like, give me a fucking break. But I want to get to the points that he made in the article that are legitimate. And I think there's two in particular, and one is the condition of the backstretch. And I think there is pretty, I'm not gonna say rampant, but pretty commonplace abuse in terms of the people who are closest to the horse and who have the least power in this business to advocate for themselves. And that's why I think it's a good thing that some local unions here in New York are going into the Belmont backstretch and trying to help them unionize, because a lot of times the backstretch workers do not have a voice. Some barns treat their workers really well. A lot of them really don't, because they're like, sometimes their immigration status might be murky, and they're like, basically have a power over their workers to just keep quiet and just go along to get along. We'll pay you when we pay you. So I think that that's a huge deal and something that we should talk about more on the show, that most people in the industry should talk about. And it's just kind of it's been a silent issue for a long time. And I think somewhat is starting to get addressed with some of the Labor Department fines and, some of the attempts at unionization. So I think that that's a huge deal and a very, very fair point that he made. And I wish, honestly, if he just wanted to do a piece about that, and just like talk to backstretch workers, I would have been all for that. Like that's great reporting, because nobody else is saying that. No one else is telling that story. All the other bullshit, all the other stuff that's in the article, like pretty much all of it has been done to death and said a million times before. That's the piece right there. And I would love for Noah or somebody else to go in there and report that story fully, because that is a huge issue. And, from people that are pretty voiceless. Yeah.
And Joe, you mentioned that, and Kim Valerio actually came on our show and talked about the fact that the health issues on the backstretch not only affect the humans that take care of the horses, but also the equine athletes. And I'm sure, I couldn't get a word in edgewise, with Tinky and Ron last week, because they were talking so much about Lasix. But if you're somebody that has issues breathing sometimes. I'm on medication when the pollen blooms and everything like that. It's tough to breathe. It's tough to perform, athletically outside when that occurs. So when you have, barn areas that haven't been spruced up or touched in decades, and the amount of lack of airflow that goes on back there, and the amount of dust and particles, it's only going to affect every athlete's respiratory system, human and equine. So that is definitely something that is part of the rubric as to whether or not horses stay healthy, and need to have Lasix or other medications like that. But I think Kim is the one who's championing that a lot, and has actually met with Churchill Downs on a few occasions to talk to them about, hey, could you maybe take a fraction of what you're putting into the paddock and all the new structures you're building for customer benefit and satisfaction and enjoyment, and maybe put like a fraction of it into the barn area. Even if you don't want to do it for the people that are working there, do it for the horses, do it for the ones that are actually performing on there. I think it should be for both. Kim thinks it should be for both also. But like, if you don't want to do it as a social experiment, do it because it's only going to help your product, on a regular basis. So I'm sorry, I interrupted you on that.
No, I mean, that's a great point. And Kim has been a champion of that. And I think it's a great point, especially in relation to the amount of money that Churchill Downs is spending to upgrade facilities for basically, let's call it like it is, 2 days a year, maybe 4 if you get the Breeders' Cup.
Yep.
The rest of the year, all those amenities are going to be sitting empty. So 100% there should be a big portion of that investment going to the backstretch. I think the same thing at Belmont too, putting $450 million into this new facility. And the backs, maybe they're going there, but the barns to me look exactly the same, and I don't see any construction or anything being done there right now. So I think that's a huge case to make it an interesting story if somebody wants to write it. The other thing, the other obvious salient point that he makes is about the relationship between casinos and states and the racetracks. Now, I don't think that this is like a one size fits all approach. To me, and I was thinking about this a lot, John, what about, because NYRA is thriving with those casino revenues.
Yep.
Like I said, they're putting a bunch of money into capital upgrades. Their product is better. The production is better. There are certain tracks where they're taking that casino revenue and throwing it into the main product. But then there are all sorts of other tracks where they're taking that casino revenue and running terrible products that almost nobody bets on and nobody goes to see. Now, I would love to see a situation where your handle's got to be up to a certain point in order for you to get those casino revenues. Now, it doesn't have to be like 1-to-1 casino to racing. Like, it doesn't have to be that, but I just think there should be a certain threshold that you have to show the industry and the state at large that you're putting effort into bolstering the main product that you're supposed to be in charge of. Otherwise, that subsidy goes away and then that kickback goes away.
Right.
Because what he didn't mention in the story is that a lot of times the casino and racing relationship happens because the racetrack has the gaming license.
Yeah.
The racetrack has the land. They let the casino come in, take some of the land, share in the gaming license, and as a result, they kick back some of that casino revenue to the racing product. And I think that that's a natural, I don't think that's a giveaway. I think that's a natural partnership, the kind you see in business all the time. The question is, what is the racetrack doing with that revenue? And if they aren't putting it back into the product and trying to improve the product and trying to improve safety and handle, then I agree. I think you snatch that revenue away and say, hey, you don't really want to run this business, do you?
Yeah, and that's, I know that relationship is really complex, having seen it in much more detail in Florida. And having thresholds, I think that management wants to have thresholds like that because basically the product is not producing the kind of revenue through pari-mutuel wagering that they had anticipated or they had hoped or that it would be sustained. So management would be for it. I think it would be a detriment to the horsemen. Excuse me, in trying to do it, because I don't think that we would hit certain thresholds, especially with some of the discussions we had previously about these big groups that are coming in and making last minute bets, through the with the cams, the cow
CAW.
Yeah, thank you. As far as how much sway that has on handle. Joe, just as an aside, this weekend at Gulfstream, they were talking about that they were going to have pick 4. There was a pick 4 and there was a pick 5. That was a retail pick 4, pick 5. Does that mean that it was only for people who were on the on?
Yeah, campus? It's excluding CAW wagering, but honestly, that's to me making it seem like you're doing something because The CAW, like with the amount of combinations that you can have in the pick 4 and the pick 5 and the pick 6, it's very hard to come in and just crush all of those combinations and depress the payouts.
Right.
Where they're having the effects are in the win pools and the exacta pools,
right?
Usually, where there's only so many combinations. So to me, that's like an ass covering thing that makes it seem like they're doing something about the actual problem.
Yeah. No. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that explanation. I think you bring up two excellent points. I'll tell you the third point that I took away from the article was that give the standardbred industry a chance to put their foot in their mouth or their head up their ass, and they are going to respond to it easily. I mean, what kind of quotes did they have to represent the industry? And who's running that insane asylum? I mean, that is unbelievable. You know, the comments and the quotes that they had that I'm sure that the writer didn't even have to like try to goat out of them. They were like, "Oh, we want to talk about this industry? Yeah, you know, it's kind of like being at a party with a bunch of ugly girls." It's like, are you kidding me? Just how stupid do you have to be in this day and age, especially to say things that are off color? And you're trying to be funny, but it ain't funny anymore. You know, it's just not the right way to do it. And that's your representative as the hierarchy of that industry is this knucklehead who's you know talking like he's still at a fraternity house? Ridiculous.
And the other thing was the way he phrased it too. And to me, this is like symbolic and kind of sums up the entire article. When he talks about the deaths on the racetrack, he goes, so and so many horses were put to death on the track. I'm like, put to death? Were they on trial exactly. and then got sentenced for being slow, and then they took him out back and shot him? Like, what do you mean put to death? Like it was somebody had to make that decision because the horse wasn't good enough or something.
Like Caesar was standing there like that.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Like it's
like no, the horse broke its leg. And he was
like, how can I sensationalize this as much as possible? They put him to death.
Right. Exactly.